All right, well tonight what we're going to talk about is making salves and tinctures and why we really need to. And then at the end of this presentation, I'm going to take our first aid kit that we put together and we're going to break it down and we'll go through everything that I have in here. And I want to encourage everyone to, how many of you have taken a first aid course? Good. Okay, those of you who haven't, you know something about wound care, I know, because some of you are medical missionaries. Maybe all of you. Who's medical missionary? Okay, good. Most of you. Okay, well I'm preaching to the choir then. You can't answer. How many of you have made salves and tinctures before? Tinctures? Yeah, you can't answer. I know you make them all the time. Okay, well, why do we need to make these things? Why do we need to even consider making our own salves and tinctures? Well, most of us know that there's some rough times coming in the world, and things have already started getting rough, right? How many of you have ever been to a doctor and they give you some kind of pills? Did you ever go? Did you escape without side effects? It's very rare. You know, when we went to the doctor recently to get some blood work done for me, and his solution to anything, it seemed, was antibiotics, antifungals, anti-this, anti-that, just kill it, you know. And I really don't want to go that route. I believe that God gave us the herbs, and we're going to talk about that more tonight. One of the reasons that I believe we should learn to make herbs and tinctures and salves and things like that, or to use herbs, is because we're told in the Bible in the Spirit of Prophecy that herbs are for the healing of the nations. Here's a passage. It's taken from Revelation 22:2. We can read this together. I can see it up here, but I have to read it with my glasses here. And in the midst of the tree of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. And I want to give you some examples from the Spirit of Prophecy, from Sister White's writings. Volume 2, Selected Messages. A cup of tea made from catnip herb will quiet the nerves. And I'm enrolled in a clinical herbalism course right now, and that's one of the things that our instructor has talked about quite frequently, is using catnip herb to help calm people down. Here's another. Hop tea will induce sleep. Hot poultices over the stomach will reduce pain. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never used a hot poultice over the stomach. Have you used a hot poultice? Hop poultice over the stomach will relieve pain. Maybe I need to get some hop and give that a shot. This is God's method. The herbs that grow for the benefit of man and the little handful of herbs kept and steeped and used for sudden ailments have served tenfold, yes, 100-fold better purposes than all the drugs hidden under mysterious names and dealt out to the sick. You know as well as I do, most drugs have names this long, and there's some kind of something acid. And so if I can't pronounce it, I really don't want to be putting it in my body. 2SM, page 288. There are simple herbs that can be used for the recovery of the sick, whose effect upon the system is very different from that of those drugs that poison the blood and endanger life. You know, I worked for 16 years as an RN, and I know that my colleagues made mistakes in giving medications. And the reason I say that is because I made mistakes. I remember one night I was working second shift and I had 10 patients. It's very difficult not to make a mistake on a busy med-surg floor. Actually, I was working first shift. I just remembered I was working first shift. Very busy. 10 patients. And I gave the wrong medication to somebody. Fortunately, it was not like a really powerful heart drug or something like that, and there was no apparent wrong. But I wrote myself up because that was a grave mistake. And I can tell you it happens more than you think. There are a lot of medication errors that take place in hospitals today. Okay, I am very sorry to learn that Sister C is not well. I cannot advise any remedy for her cough better than eucalyptus and honey. I'm sure most of us have used that remedy before. Into a tumbler of honey, put a few drops of eucalyptus, stir it up well, and take whenever the cough comes on. If you will use this prescription, you may be your own physician. If the first trial does not affect a cure, try it again. The best time to take it is before retiring. One of the things that I appreciate that my instructor said in the herbalism course is when we use these herbs, we're to take it early, often, and after. In other words, we started at the first sign. We were just talking about your experience with COVID. You hit it early, and you took a lot of it, and you took it probably after you got well, didn't you? So early, often, and after is the way that we need to use these herbal remedies and herbal medications, if I can say that. Okay? One word from God, one touch of the divine finger would have been enough to cure Hezekiah instantly. But instead he was given directions to make a poultice of figs. You know, some people have suggested that the boil that Hezekiah had was actually a cancerous tumor. If that's true, it makes a lot of sense that God would have a poultice of figs put on it, because figs contain a substance called benzaldehyde that actually can dissolve cancerous tumors. So it could be that that was the case with Hezekiah. Next passage. For several days he has had a painful swelling over the knee, supposed to be from the bite of some poisonous insect. Pulverized charcoal mixed with flaxseed was placed upon the swelling, and this poultice gave relief at once. I know that all of you have experience with charcoal. I could take up the whole evening with the experiences that I've had in using charcoal as a remedy and the effect that it had. And in fact, I'll share one personal experience tomorrow evening. That's just a little clincher for you to come tomorrow night. Okay, the second reason I believe that we need to use the herbal remedies that God has given, and I've touched on this a little bit, is because according to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, 100,000 Americans die from reactions to prescription drugs each year, making this the fourth leading cause of death in the U.S. Now, this statistic is from an official site, but I personally believe that this number is much higher, much higher. Probably more than 2 or 3 times higher than that. Okay? And then another reason is that when we use antibiotics, now I'm not totally anti-medication. I believe that there is a time and there is a place, but it's far less than what it's commonly used. But overuse of antibiotics can cause antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria to become more resistant and can contribute to fungal overgrowth as well. And I've dealt with this. And these antibiotic-resistant strains that develop, as well as the fungal overgrowths that develop, are very difficult to treat. Very difficult to treat. Here's another reason. Antibiotics are not specific. They kill good bacteria in the gut as well. Or if it's a topical antibiotic, they kill, we have a flora or a bacterial presence that's good and bad, you know, on our body and in our body. So we don't want to kill the good guys. All right, and finally, herbs and natural remedies are often free, and they will work, and they work and don't have the side effects that drugs do. If you think about it, an antibiotic is specific to one or a few bacteria. It has one mechanism of action. But you take an herb, say garlic, you know, I'm taking a garlic product. Garlic may have hundreds of different mechanisms by which it works, and bacteria cannot develop resistance to all of those. An antibiotic works one way, and the bacteria can develop that resistance. But the bacteria are not able to develop that to herbs, because it's like spraying a machine gun at them. You know, there's just so many things coming at the bacteria at one time, they cannot develop a resistance to that. So making these salves and tinctures is very, very critical for us We know that a time is coming in the very near future, and I believe that time has already begun in a lot of the mandates that we see happening right now, but we know very soon we will no longer be able to buy and sell. Where will you get your medicine from if you cannot buy and sell? And if you can't replenish your herbs that you're using, where are you going to get them from? That's why I believe it's so important for us to become very well acquainted with what's out in the wilderness, out in the woods that God has given us for free, that we can learn to utilize. That has become a passion of mine, learning how to identify wild edibles and wild medicinals out in nature. That, and get seeds. While you can, obtain seeds to grow these herbs in your own soil. Okay? Here's a little bit of terminology that we can look at. A cream is a mixture of oil and water with other ingredients, and I think I'll touch on this a little bit later. But anytime you make a cream and you have anything that you have water in as far as a cream, you're going to have to put some kind of preservative in it, because it will mold if you leave it out at room temperature. And of course, mold is a very bad thing. A decoction, that's like just simmering the roots. It's the harder things like echinacea root, comfrey root, all of these roots. These have to be simmered a little bit in some heat. Okay, an extract or a glycerite. A lot of people don't understand the difference between a tincture and an extract, or a glycerite. A glycerite is technically an extract. It's a liquid preparation of herbs using a solvent to release the compounds from the plant material, and typically glycerin is used. Okay, some people use vinegar, apple cider vinegar, or other vinegars and stuff. So that's a glycerite. We're going to talk more about this in just a minute. An infusion is a preparation of herbs in hot water. It's just like steep me a cup of tea, you know. I have somewhere. I put a tea bag in here and I did a cold infusion. This morning I put my tea bag in here and I filled this up with water, and it's just been sitting all day. So that's a cold infusion that you can do. But then you can also do a heat infusion where you heat water, pour it over, and then just let it sit, and it pulls the properties into the water itself. Okay, an infused oil is an herbal preparation with a carrier oil. Typically this must macerate, well that's our next word, for a period of time. Basically all that is when you take, for instance, comfrey and put it in some oil, and you let that sit for about a month to 6 weeks, and then you can make comfrey salve out of that oil. Okay, so that's an infused oil. Maceration is the process of allowing herbs to sit in a menstruum, that's our one of our next words, for a period of time. Okay, so let's drop down to menstruum so we can define that, since we just mentioned that word. Is a solvent used in the preparation of herbal extracts or tinctures. So if we're making an extraction, what would our menstruum be? It would be glycerin. Yes. Okay. So glycerin, vinegar, alcohol, whatever, that would be your menstruum. Okay. Your mark is the plant material used in making an herbal preparation. I'm just giving you a little bit of terminology, because if you ever start hanging out with people who do this kind of stuff and they start throwing these words out, you want to know what they're talking about. Okay. All right. Percolation. This is a process. I don't use this, but it's like you set up like it's kind of like a drip thing. You put the alcohol or glycerin or whatever in the top, and then you put your herb in the bottom of this little funnel-like thing, and then it just the menstruum will drip slowly through the mark and pull the properties out of it.
Like making percolated coffee, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of like percolating coffee. Yeah, that's the percolation method. A salve is a semi-solid medicinal ointment prepared by combining an herb infused with oil and beeswax. So in our example that we just used, if we took comfrey and put it in some olive oil or some other kind of oil and let it sit for a month to 6 weeks, then we would strain that out, and then we will put it in a pot. We can melt that, melt some beeswax into that, and when it cools off, the beeswax will give the salve its consistency. That's how you get a salve thicker or thinner or what have you, is by how much beeswax you put in it. Okay, a tincture is an herbal extract typically using alcohol as the menstruum. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. Okay, to make a tincture, typically it's 40% alcohol that is used. And if you're using some mushrooms, like chaga mushroom is a very hard mushroom, reishi mushroom is a very tough and hard mushroom, and then certain barks and stuff, a lot of times you have to have a little bit higher percentage of alcohol than you do if you're just making like a comfrey leaf tincture or something like that. So here is an example, and if you have a phone and you want to take a picture of this, this is actually how you might make burdock root tincture. Burdock is one of those herbs that, I believe God put superpowers into. The way I believe that burdock is so efficient is because it helps to clear the liver of congestion and toxicity and stuff. So if you wanted to make, in this example, a burdock root tincture, you would clean up several fresh roots and put them in some kind of glass jar. I like to use canning jars. Put them in there, and then you can use, a lot of people use vodka, which you don't have to dilute, but it has to be the 50% alcohol. Most vodkas are 40% alcohol, but you can find vodka that has 50%. It's also known as 100 proof. So you have 80 proof, which is 40%, or you have 100 proof, which is 50% alcohol. Then you would add the alcohol at a 2-to-1 ratio. In other words, you'd have 2 cups of vodka to 1 cup of fresh root. And trust me, I'm going to talk about this alcohol thing in just a minute, okay? If you are using dried roots, you need to use more liquid, because why would you need to use? Obviously, it's going to absorb it, okay? It's going to absorb a lot of your liquid, so you're going to have to use more liquid if you use dried herbs, okay? This, I think, isn't ever clear like a name brand of 100. When I make tinctures, I use a product called Extractahol. It's 190 proof alcohol, which is basically 100% alcohol. Isn't it 100%? 95%, okay. So if you're going to use that type of alcohol product, you have to dilute your alcohol 50-50 with water. So you're going to have a lot more water than alcohol in an alcohol tincture that you use this very concentrated alcohol with.
So, up there, why would you want to use the 80 proof compared to 100 proof?
Because burdock is a root, okay, and it's a little harder for an 80 proof or a 40% alcohol vodka to extract the properties out of that root, okay? So you want to use something and that's why I don't use vodka. I use Extractahol, which is specifically designed for making tinctures. Yes?
And I think it's good to mention too, you can get organic.
Yes, what I use, because I deal with a lot of people that are gluten intolerant, I use a 100% organic cane alcohol. So it's not a cane alcohol.
Where do you get that from?
I order it online. I think it's Tesla. I'll give you the, and then if we put this on YouTube, I'll put it in the description below the video. Tesla something or other, Tesla Laboratories or Scientific or something like that. But that's where, but if you Google Extractahol, Extractahol, I think, it'll come up.
I have a question.
Yes.
If I add water to my alcohol, how would that stay for months and months, the water?
If you're using this high percentage alcohol, you have to add water, and it will keep. It will keep, and I'm going to talk about that, the difference between the preservation quality of glycerin as opposed to alcohol and stuff like that. I am going to touch on that, but but the reason is because it has so much alcohol in it. You really, number one, you don't need that much, but it actually could damage the herb with that much alcohol in it. So, okay, to make an extract. Now, an extract again is not a tincture. They're different. Okay, an extract with, or to make a glycerite, is same thing, extract glycerite. You need to use a minimum of 60% glycerin. And I wish I had brought some bottles and stuff and I could just actually show you this. But what that would mean is, like, if I have a jar and I fill it up with herb, I just use what's called the folk method. In other words, I don't always weigh my herb. I just fill the jar up. For instance, if it's a very light herb, like a leaf or a flower, I'll just fill the jar up. And then I would put 60% of that with glycerin and the rest with water, like purified water, distilled water, something like that. You have to have a minimum of 60% glycerin in order to get that extraction to preserve, to not mold and go bad. But now if you get your percentage up around 75-80%, your extract will last much longer. Okay? So it takes a lot of glycerin to do this. All right? If you make it with the 60% glycerin, your extraction or your glycerite will last roughly 2 years, which is roughly the shelf life of the herb itself. So to me, that makes no sense. Okay? The second thing is, if you get it at a higher percentage, as I have here, you can double your shelf life of that extraction. So why not just go right here to begin with and put 75 to 80% if you're going to use a glycerin. Okay? Now, I'm just going to go ahead and mention this now, because I know a lot of people are like, she calls herself a Christian and she's using alcohol. Yes. Okay? I'm using it as a medication. All right? I'm not getting drunk off this stuff. But let me tell you something. A lot of people go to glycerin because they want to avoid the alcohol. But glycerin is an alcohol.
But it doesn't taste as bad as alcohol.
It doesn't taste as bad. It's got, to me, an icky sweet taste. I don't like the taste. It's too sweet. It's very much too sweet. Okay, but it is an alcohol. So if you're trying to run from alcohol by using glycerin, you're like the man that ran from the bear and came in the house and there was a snake waiting on him. Okay, so you're not getting away from alcohol by using glycerin. Okay, if you want to escape the use of alcohol, then just make teas. Okay, or take capsules or what have you. So.
But the tincture is better. The extracts are better.
The extracts they're easier to take. They're more concentrated. You don't have to take as much. They're portable, which you think about it, you know, like me right now, we're traveling, you know. What if I had to bring big old jars of teas to make and all that kind of stuff? It's much easier just to bring a little bitty bottle of tincture with me. It makes a lot more sense to me. Okay, let's talk about making a salve. Once the mark, which is the herb itself, okay? Once your herb itself, and I use the words in here to throw them out and get you more familiar with them, okay? They say if you tell somebody what a word means, they might remember it shortly, but if you use it in a sentence, they tend to remember it much better. Once the mark or the herb is infused into the oil of choice, a lot of people like to use this jojoba oil. Is that how you say it? Jojoba? 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 Anyway, I use mostly extra virgin olive oil.
In Spanish, it's
Yeah, okay. I use olive oil. That's what I use in my organic olive oil. So you put the herb in there for about 4 to 6 weeks, and then you strain it out. And then I put about, like if I have 4 cups of that oil, I'll put 1 cup of beeswax. So I use some things. I use a 5 to 1. Like if it's a salve for a burn or something like that, you're going to want that a little bit softer. You don't want anybody raking over your burn, you know, and stuff. But some salves I'll make a little bit stiffer, some I'll make a little bit softer. Okay, so if you want it a little bit softer, you would use a little bit less beeswax or a little more oil in that ratio. So it would be more like 5 to 1. That would give you a softer salve. So 5 cups of oil to 1 cup of beeswax. Okay. No preservative typically is needed for salves because they don't contain water. Okay, so they typically are not going to go bad. They're going to last a lot longer than a cream or a lotion or something like that. Okay, and then I have that down there. I have added essential oils and stuff to my salves, and it works quite nicely, and it adds medicinal value as well. Yes, sir?
It seems like several of these recipes, 4 to 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody needs to know this information and get it going before it's needed.
That's why I have all that stuff on the table back there.
Just,
right.
get a problem and have an instant.
That's right. But there are some things that you can use instantly. For example, my husband and I were out hiking one day, and anybody familiar with stinging nettles? You walk across stinging nettles and you rake your hand across it accidentally, it hurts. It definitely stings. Well, that happened to Kaylin one day when we were hiking in eastern Kentucky. And I had been noticing, whenever I go somewhere, I'm looking at the woods to see what they have. I'm looking at their grocery store. Okay, and we went out hiking today to see what was available here on this property. And so I had been observing to see what was available, as we were on this hike. And I happened to have just glanced down at some heal-all, or self-heal, some people call it. And when my husband said, ow, that hurt, I just reached down and grabbed some heal-all and I said, crush this and rub it on there. He did, and it was almost instant, wasn't it? Almost instantly he had relief from that. So there are things that we can use in nature instantly, but why risk it? We know, as we'll discuss tomorrow evening, we're going to talk about the no-buy, no-sell time frame. I believe we need to really ramp up our preparations for that time, because again, with all the mandates that we see right now going on, it has started. It's already begun, okay? And so we really need to be preparing for that time. Okay, a note on oil infusions. It's typically best to wilt your herbs a little bit before you infuse them in oil to make a salve, because if you don't, the water in the herb can cause your oil to go rancid. So either use dried herbs, or if you've harvested them fresh, which I do sometimes, I always wilt it or slightly dry it to get a lot of that moisture out, so that I don't make my oil go rancid. And again, just stressing the same point again, if you make a cream and it has water in it, you will have to use some type of preservative in that, because it will mold. And I was making creams at one point, and I just would tell people to put them in the fridge, but even in the fridge it would mold. And so I stopped making creams. I don't do that no more. Let somebody else do that. Okay, let's talk about wound care a little bit. I know that we talked about making salves and tinctures, but now I want to talk about, let's say you have some kind of wound and you have all of these herbs on your shelf and you're trying to figure out which are the best ones to use. Well, let's talk about the different things that you would need to have in a wound care salve. Again, let's look at some terminology. Biofilm. Who's heard of biofilm? Okay. Biofilm is like these little bacteria. They are so slick. The devil has really done his job well. Biofilm is like a shield that the bacteria can put to protect themselves from antibiotics and stuff like that. So biofilm is very difficult to deal with. The most common biofilm is tooth plaque. That's a biofilm. Have you ever picked up like the drain in your sink and felt the bottom and it's slick? That's a biofilm of bacteria. That's biofilm. It's nasty stuff. Of course, bacteria are infectious agents. Wound proliferation is the growth of new granulation tissue. I'm going to show you some pictures in just a little bit in a wound bed. Exudate is any kind of wound drainage, okay? These are just some terms that I want you to hear, okay? And you can have different types of exudate. You know, it can be that clear looking drainage, or it can be mixed with blood, or it can be actual pus, which of course is a sign of infection. Slough is the byproduct of an inflammatory phase of wound healing, and it's comprised of fibrin, leukocytes, dead and living cells, microorganisms, and proteinaceous material. So that's some of that slimy, gooey stuff that you see in wounds sometimes, and that's not always a bad thing, okay? All right, anytime you're looking at some wound care, you need to address these three factors. You need to have an herb that will address biofilm, something like rosemary, echinacea, turmeric. These are all biofilm busters. Then you need to address bacteria, something with berberine like golden seal or Oregon grape or barberry, okay, oregano. And then you need to address wound healing with something like comfrey, something that's very soothing, something that's going to help pull those tissues together. Aloe vera is another good one there. And the interesting thing with a lot of the herbs that God has given us is they'll have more than one of these properties. And so I love that overlap that we see in nature that God has implanted there, is they often will deal with more than one area. So herbs are very, very valuable. Okay, some herbs contain a substance called bicolin, and this interferes with, there's a way that these bacteria in our body communicate. It's kind of getting a little technical, but it's called quorum sensing. And this property, this bicolin, interferes with how these bacteria communicate with one another. And so they can't, because a lot of times whenever bacteria, if we have a systemic bacterial infection, these bacteria communicate with one another, and they all do the same thing at the same time, even though they're in different areas of the body. And it's this way that they communicate. Well, bicolin interferes with that. Okay, and some of the herbs that contain bicolin are Oregon grape leaf. It contains that substance. Other herbs, and this is, I know I'm getting a little bit too technical, but anyway, herbs that are good to deal with biofilm, which has to do with how these bacteria communicate. We mentioned some of them: rosemary, chamomile, thyme, Oregon grape, peppermint, tea tree, eucalyptus, uva ursi, black walnut leaf. The leaves from the black walnut is a very useful tree. The black walnut, the pine, all of these leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nation. White oak is a very good wound care. You can take white oak leaves and make like a tea and make a wound wash. It will help to pull tissues together. Okay? Components of a good wound powder, and I'm going to show you some wound powders in just a minute and talk a little bit about what I do with them. In fact, let me mention it now. I had a patient one time that had a pressure sore. A pressure sore. This lady called me. The nurse that was coming didn't think it was a pressure sore, but when I went there and looked at it, it was definitely a pressure sore. And they had tried a lot of different stuff to try to get it to clear up. And they weren't able to get it to clear up with all of these special bandages and stuff. So I asked the lady, I said, "Do you have turmeric? Do you have honey?" She had them both. So we took equal parts of turmeric and honey and mixed them together and packed in that wound. And that thing, within a matter of days, was dramatically different. Bacteria cannot grow in honey. That's why honey never spoils. So if you don't know what to put on a wound, honey is always a good choice.
But the hospitals now they're treating the diabetics with.
We used to pack sugar in the wounds used to.
Because I have friends in Maryland that they go and they say they actually
Yeah.
honey.
One of the things that I stocked up on in my preparations for what's ahead is honey. Honey. Okay? Some herbs also contain a substance called 5-MHC. I won't torture you with pronunciations, which inhibits the ability of antibiotic-resistant bacteria such as MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. That's the bad bug that gets in the hospitals and they have to close down units. Okay, it inhibits these bacteria from being able to withstand the effect of the herbs. Some of these bacteria actually have 2 cell walls, and they, as soon as an antibiotic enters the cell, it has this efflux pump and it pumps it out just as fast. And some of the really bad bacteria, for instance, like Bartonella or something like that, Bartonella not only contains this 2-layer cell wall, but it has the capacity to take the antibiotics, pump them out, and turn them into food for themselves. I mean, is that sinister or what? That is sinister, okay? So herbs that inhibit the ability of these bacteria to pump the antibiotic out, and this is why these bacteria can't become immune to these herbs, is because they have this efflux pump inhibiting property. Oregon graperoot, cayenne. This is good medicine right here. Golden seal. Golden seal and Oregon grape are in kind of the same family. They both contain berberine. That's that yellow, really bitter yellow stuff that is in golden seal and Oregon grape. Oregano, sage, thyme, calendula, usnea. Do you know what usnea is? Okay, would you get that stick off the front porch for me that we found today? I have a video on our YouTube channel on usnea, so if you can go to our channel, it's under my name, Dana Gazelschen, and look up the usnea lichen, USNEA lichen, LICHEN. This is good medicine right here because it's antifungal, antibacterial, it helps to stop hemorrhage. So, okay, thank you. It grows in, it's called lungs of the woods. I'm going to take this piece right here and kind of pass it around so you guys can actually see it, and I'll use this other piece. It just looks like some kind of lichen. It grows in association with this algae that's on the stick, and then I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to reinvent the wheel because I've already talked about it in that video, but if you tear it apart, there are other lichens that look like this that are not medicinal. Okay, but if you take the usnea and you gently pull on it, it's kind of rubbery, and then you'll see it has like a white cord on the inside. If you're walking out in the woods and you cut yourself on something, you can take a ball of this usnea lichen and put it in the wound, and it will help stop the bleeding and it will not become infected. So usnea is a very, very good plant herb to know. Excuse me.
I take my time to wash my blueberries and take all those out.
Okay.
So when you have listed there like 3 things,
Okay.
and then you have additionally, so are the first 3 better?
These are like the biggies. You know, they're very powerful in this. And then also these herbs also contain, you know, these efflux pump inhibiting properties. Okay, so components of a good wound powder. You want to address, you want something that is astringent or that will help pull tissues together. Something that helps, you know, is very soothing. Aloe vera is a very good one for that. Okay, comfrey is another good one. Marshmallow is another good one for that. Okay, the tissue proliferation properties of comfrey are phenomenal. Does anybody know Don Miller? I know you know Don. Dr. Don Miller and I, we've been friends for many years, and back, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago when I was working at Uchee Pines, Don came into the Lifestyle Center and he had cut off the tips of 2 fingers down to the bone. And he didn't want to go to the hospital. Dr. Calvin sent somebody to try to find his fingertips because he wanted him to go have them reattached. But Don wouldn't go. So I scrubbed it up and gave him some comfrey powder and told him how to use it and stuff. He used it very faithfully. In 3 weeks, Don's fingertips had grown back. And he was playing guitar in 3 weeks. It was amazing. I would have called you a liar if I hadn't seen it myself. Okay, I saw it myself.
So he used comfrey, what did you use? Comfrey.
Comfrey was the main thing that he used. So here's a sample for a wound powder. You might want to take a picture of this. Of course, I have the usnea. You might want to use something like 2 parts yarrow.
That's the usnea there. That's a lot of it.
Huh?
That's the usnea there.
This is usnea. Yeah, and I have a video on this. Now be sure to identify it properly. Go watch my video on how to identify that, because there are lookalikes that don't have the same medicinal properties. But if you look for that white inner cord and it grows in conjunction with this algae, then pretty good chances. Now not all usneas look alike. When my husband and I were in Oregon back in June of this year, their usnea looks similar to this, but it's different enough that, I had to test it, to make sure it was the same thing. So 2 parts yarrow. Yarrow is it's very good for wound care. It has antibacterial properties. It helps to stop bleeding. In fact, if you're out, and you have yarrow growing in your yard and you get a nosebleed, you can take a leaf and shove it up your nose, and it'll help to stop that nosebleed. It's very powerful for that. 2 parts Oregon grape leaf. Now that's going to help with the other, the bacterial properties that we talked about earlier. 2 parts aloe powder, 1 part usnea, 2.5 parts Oregon grape root, and 1 part burdock. Burdock is the leaf is really good for burns. You can take a leaf and dry it and keep it in your cupboard, and if somebody gets burned, you just dip that in warm water and place it on that burn. It's very soothing, very healing. It makes like a slimy cut. It has that same demulcent property. Okay? Everybody got the picture? All right. I can let you get that after we go on. So. Okay, I'm going to give you a testimonial of a cat with a very serious neck wound. A friend of mine called me back in May of this year, and something had happened to her cat. She didn't know what had happened to her cat, but it had a very nasty wound. This is what it looked like whenever she first sent me the picture. If you notice how pale, that's not a happy wound. It's very pale. There's not a lot going on here as far as good circulation and healing and all that. This is an unhappy wound. There's also some signs of infection. She had a little bit of pus coming out of it and stuff, and just kind of gross. Okay? And then we started treatment on it. I told her to start irrigating it with charcoal, and then I took her some wound powder that I had made, and I used that recipe that I just shared with you guys. Okay? So you can see after just a few days of irrigating with charcoal and using that wound powder, you see how beefy red this is? There's no signs of infection anymore. This is a nice vascular bed. In other words, there's a lot of good blood flow coming to that wound now. Okay? So then a few days later, you notice that it's starting to close up a little bit. You have here, this was a very deep channel in the wound right here, but it's still basically a happy wound. It's just in process of healing. Okay, and then even though this looks yucky, it was really closing in. You had some tissue proliferation happening here. You have some signs of granulation tissue. No veterinarian bill. Poor kitty, I feel sorry for him, but he was healing. Okay, 17 days from her first call to me, this is what it looks like. No signs of infection. All right, here we go again. It's really beginning to close up. You have some scabbing here and stuff. 22 days from the beginning to this. And that, I wish you could have actually seen the wound, because it was really nasty. It was infected whenever she first saw it. So We went from this to this in 22 days, and it closed up not too long after this. So these wound powders and herbs and things, they really do work, and it pays to learn how to use these things to make wound washes. You can take that wound powder recipe and make an irrigation with it. You could irrigate a wound, and then you could take a little bit of honey and mix it with that wound powder. That's what I had her do. That's what all this goopy stuff is. I had her mix the wound powder with a little honey and pack it in this wound, and it healed nicely.